I don't know if you ever saw the sign, Arbeit macht free. Work makes you free. We were wondering, either free to the chimney or to killing us eventually. And I stayed there, ladies and gentlemen, to 1945. 1945, the Russians were approaching already, and the killing machine was going on. I'm just doing it quick because from that January 15th, we left Auschwitz. A couple hours later, the Russians came in, but it was too late for us. Now, I was working at that time in a factory, and I'm sorry, I was building cannons, anti-aircraft, 88 millimeter cannons. There was anti-aircraft and anti-tanks. And maybe because of this, I didn't have to work all those years outside. Didn't do it as hard labor. The food and the rest of things was the same, but I worked inside. I wasn't as good, I wasn't as beaten as the other ones. But I want to mention one thing, what happened to me in this camp. I was working with one of them, with a Gestapo, but he worked in an office. And I was doing the last, before the cannon went out, I checked everything, if everything is working. This guy used to bring me bread every day. He used to throw it in the garbage, and I used to take it out and eat it. Because if you saved it, and you walk in the camp, you get killed.
Mr. Tuck?
Yes.
Can we hold there, because I'd like to introduce Mr. Zeifman,
Okay.
and then we can also add more information and go to the students' questions. Mr. Jack Zeifman, tailor, and I think that's part of a story too.
How did I become a tailor? First of all, my name is Jack Zeifman, and how did I become a tailor? I was born in Radom, Poland, and my family is right here. We were 3 children, and when the war started, I was taken away from my home by the Germans and registered and put into cattle cars. But for me, being a short fella, trying to get into the cattle car, I couldn't get myself up to that cattle car. I was being pushed by the other guys because they were being beaten. So I found myself underneath the cattle car, and I managed to get home. I ran away. That same night, police came to look for me. And when they knocked on the door, police, I was lucky enough that we lived on the first floor, and I got out, opened the window, got out. And they checked our apartment. Since I wasn't there, they left. I got back in, and we were discussing with my family, what are we going to do? If the neighbors will see me and they'll squeal, my whole family will be shot. So my father had a friend in a little town of Volanov, which is about 12 kilometers from Radom. He suggested I should make the journey and go there, and maybe I'll be saved and they'll be saved that way. But it was martial law. You weren't supposed to be on the outside after 7 o'clock. I had a bicycle, and I took a chance, and I started riding that bike up to Volanov. I saw from distances, I saw a car or a truck coming with Germans. I lay down on the side of the road because it was at night, midnight, and I made it safe. I got to Volanov, and I knocked on the door, told him the situation. He was a tailor, my father's best friend, and he took me in. And for taking me in, I wanted to reciprocate, at least do something. So I started helping out, and I learned how to hold a needle and how to start sewing. And I became a tailor. We stayed in that little town till 1940. In 1940, the Gestapo came down and took all the Jews out of their homes in the marketplace, and there was a segregation right then and there. They started the old and the young to one side, all the able bodies which are able to work in the other. They had already built a camp for us in Volanov on the electric wires with machine gun towers, and they took us in there. All those old people and the young were all shot. And what was going on that time at that selection was we all cried and we all screamed, and it didn't help any because they took little kids. The mothers didn't want to give them up, and they would turn them out, and they were just throwing him and shooting at him. And it was an agonizing thing. We finally got into camp, and there were 600 men. The women were in a separate camp. Typhoid fever broke out in that camp because there was no sanitary ways to clean yourself. And one early morning, again the Gestapo surrounded the camp while we were staying in the Appel. And they start taking out at random people. This guy, and as it was going out, it was being shot. It was being shot with dum-dum bullets. The bullet, if it hit your body, exploded. I had a friend of mine, took out his brother, and he ran out, and they were both shot. There was a father and 2 sons, which were killed. 350 people were shot that morning. We, the remainder, had to dig 2 big trenches and bury those people. I contracted typhoid fever then. Typhoid fever is a sickness with high temperature. For 3 days I walked to work, but the 4th day I couldn't make it. I couldn't get out the bunk bed. It was impossible. But the buddies which were laying next to me said, if you don't get out, you're gonna be shot. And that's why they were killing everybody, which didn't work. So they dressed me the best way they could, and they carried me underneath the arms, dragged me the 4 kilometers to the camp where the Germans were. And the minute I got into the camp, I walked over to my boss, which was Herr Meister Steinmetz. And I told him my situation. I says, I'm very sick. Please help me. And he looked at me, beautiful person. And he took me in his car with another guy by the name of Adolf Hammel. He was a sergeant in the Air Force. And they took me down to a Polish farmer in a village away from the camp. And asked the farmer if he would keep me there. And the farmer agreed to take me in. You can imagine the chance he took, because if I would have been found in their house, their whole family would have been shot. I was laying underneath a hoop of potatoes, covered up with a blanket on straw. And I survived that ordeal. I got back to camp, and the next camp was Blizhin, a camp of about 3,000. And there we were making only everything for the army, uniforms, shoes, hats, shirts, everything. I was working, again, as a tailor. I was making reversible jackets for the Russian front. The Russian front, green on one side and white on the other. This was my job. In the 12 hours, I had to produce 2 jackets. And in that camp, I had a dear friend which I met in Volanov. So that guy got typhoid fever. And since I know what it takes to get a little help, I boiled up some hot water and I had some sugar. And I made him a tea, and I ran across the camp because he was laying in a barrack. They didn't want to waste a bullet in that camp. You die or you live. And I took over that tea. I had 10 minutes time to walk out and be back because I told him to the washroom. All right.
Thank you very much. I think one of the hardest things that I have to do in this particular job, I hope you appreciate it, is to actually ask somebody to stop telling their story for a moment. But one of the reasons we're doing it is so that you have an opportunity to get involved and to possibly get more of your thoughts clarified. We have a young woman from Truman High School, correct?
Yes.
Would you stand up here? And what's your name?
Tamika.
And Tamika, what's your question?
I want to know, did like any of you guys hide like before they was coming to take y'all out your houses, or did you know anyone that hid?
Okay, the question is, were you able to hide before you were taken away? Yes, Mr. Tuck.
Well, I tried to. I had the guts to take off the Star of David and walk around without it. We had 2 stars, one in the front, one in the back. The purpose of this was, if they needed work to clean up war equipment, there was, the Polish army had a lot of horses. At that time, they didn't mechanize. So everything was pulling cannons, everything. So anytime they found somebody, where they find horses and anything, soldiers, they took us to work. I did it, and somebody squealed on me, and I was beaten. I was put to work.
So your attempt to hide
Yeah.
didn't work too well.
No, it didn't work.
Okay. Would you stand up? And your name is?
Maisha Perry.
Maisha, what is your question?
Did any of you marry a Holocaust survivor?
Yeah.
You married a Holocaust survivor? How did you meet?
Well, I was after the war. I was liberated in Austria, in Mauthausen. And then I went to, I was for a while, I still stayed in camp because the American soldiers didn't want to let us come out. And then I went to Austria. From Austria, I went to Italy. They asked me, anybody wants, I wanted to get out of Austria. And then they asked me, all the Italians go back to Italy. So I was an Italian. I'm back to Italy.
Wait a minute, you're an Italian now?
Well, no. But at that time, it was convenient. I just want to get out of there. I was afraid maybe it's still going to come back. So from there, I went from Italy, I stayed for a while, and I went to France, Paris. I met my wife.
So you met in Paris?
Yeah.
And she was also
She was
in
in
the camps?
concentration, yeah.
Right. Mr. Block, you said you met your wife
Well,
also.
I knew my wife as a child when we were both little. Her mother was our neighbor, my hometown, and they moved to a different town. Of course, when I was 14, I left home, and I didn't know what happened to her. But when the camp was there in 38, her parents sent her on a children's transport to England. That time, England took in 9,500 children from Germany up to the age of 16, and she was the oldest one. And I didn't see or hear from her. I was in the American Army. I was in England. I met a friend of hers that comes also from my hometown, and she never mentioned her. And she finally immigrated in 46 to America, and there was a party somewhere in Brooklyn, and she asked somebody, is there anybody in Philadelphia, that's where I'm from our old home? So a woman said, I only know one family by the name of Bloch, and that was us. So she came to my mother and told her. My mother got in touch with Ilse, my wife, and we met, and 2 months later we got married, and we've been married for 50 years.
So through all this horror, love still has an opportunity
Yeah,
to bloom.
we knew
at
each
one
other
point.
for about 6 years before.
That's a great question. I didn't think about that. Yes.
I married also a survivor from Hungary. We met after the war, right? As a matter of fact, we were on the same march naar de Dachau. And I didn't know it then, but just by a couple of weeks after liberation, because I was taken to a hospital, right? I was 70 pounds at liberation. And
You weighed 70 pounds when you
70
were
pounds,
liberated.
Yeah. And I met my wife.
More than that.
Yeah. Yeah. More than double.
You look like a zombie.
Yeah.
We all
So
look like.
I met her, and we are already married 52 years.
Mr. Herbst, you, one of the things that just came to my mind is when Mr. Zeifman was talking about the fact that he weighed 70 pounds, you happened to escape and then come back, and you were involved with the American Army as an
Right.
interpreter, correct?
Right.
What did you see when you entered the camps of people that were left alive?
I have everything in pictures here. So what I say is the way. I was stationed with a military government that was lucky enough to get into a good outfit. Originally, I was in the armored division, and they transferred me on account of my language, and we went to England and shipped to France, Belgium. I was in the Battle of the Bulge,